What's up, y'all? It's your boy Marcus Bullock. I'm the CEO and founder of Flick Shop. I always get excited for our episodes of Marcus Ask. So I'm hoping. Let me make sure I'm saying what's up to all of you guys who are joining the conversation. I'm super excited about it. Tonight's special guest, we got Rita Montoya. She's an attorney, and I'm super excited to have her join in the conversation. She's about to get us in a second. She's already on, which makes it so dope. I love when people. Lee, I'm loving it. This is gonna be a dope conversation. We're gonna talk about that one thing that majority of us want to talk about. We want experts around us to be able to help us guide that conversation. There she is. What's up, Rita? How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. I'm so excited to be on.
Oh my good. Let me tell you something. You know, I'm always the one that's winning in these conversations. Always. I'm always excited about joining the conversation with folks who know what we're doing at Flick Shop. They know our product. They know what we're building. And most importantly, they're part of our amazing community. And so for your willingness to be able to want to help contribute to the conversation, I'm super grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Nah, this was going to be fun. So we're going to jump right in there, Rita. And I hate introducing people now. My team, they send me all this information about you, but I would love if you take a second to introduce yourself to our amazing community.
Thank you. My name is Rita Montoya. I am an Indigenous and Latinx attorney. I grew up in California and spent most of my life there. I've traveled to a variety of places and settled in the Washington, D.C. area where I am now. I'm a former public defender in Colorado. I've done some immigration law, and now I primarily focus on cannabis law and policy, including helping small businesses and family-owned businesses and Black and Indigenous and other people of color get into this industry.
This is dope. I mean, we all want to know and learn how to get into this industry, and I'm grateful that you have so much experience there. I don't have much experience in learning how to get into the industry. I was locked up with a rack of people that were in this space, which is crazy. I mean, that we call this a space now. It's like an industry now. But when I was growing up and we were trying to figure out where the weed man was, where to go buy weed from. We all knew we would buy dirt that was grass that we were all smoking, but it wasn't in my mind, it wasn't. I never thought I would be locked up with people who had years, years for marijuana. And so now coming back on the flip side of it, and now I've been working in this space, and now me and people are like, yo, this is an industry now, and people are making money off of it, and I still have friends that's locked up. So I'm excited to be able to bring you on and to help unlock a lot of this, because I'm sure that I can't be the only one who have peers that have went to jail or prison for marijuana and now watching it be legal now in a lot of states around the country.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had peers, I had friends growing up who, I lived in a low income neighborhood. It was all Black and Mexican, really, in the neighborhoods I grew up in. And a lot of my peers used marijuana. And some of them got in trouble for it or weren't able to go after some of the opportunities that they wanted to have for a variety of reasons. And then I became an attorney representing thousands of people who were too poor to afford to be able to pay for a lawyer. So they got one from the government, and that was me and my peers. Public defenders do a lot of hard work out there.
Shout out to the public defenders, all the PDs.
A lot of our clients, whether we were representing them on marijuana charges or not, had marijuana somewhere in their history, right? Maybe a lot of times it's a probation violation, right? These things that we know, and this was before legalization was in a lot of our states the way that it is now. So we definitely see those. We still see it happening. I have some statistics that we can talk about when you're ready, that I pulled from the most recent FBI crime data, looking at sales, arrests for marijuana sales and arrests for marijuana possession, both in the United States as well as in the state of Maryland, where I'm based, because I think that the full picture is not being painted. And quite frankly, our government is not being held accountable. And I think that's something that we all can do. You don't have to be an attorney to do that.
I mean, so let's talk about this. Let's paint the picture then, right? I mean, you're based in Maryland, but you're very familiar with what's happening around the country. First, I mean, do we know how many states are there where marijuana is legal? Do we know that yet? Do we have that stat anywhere?
I'm sure it is. Honestly, I stopped counting because every day there's some new thing going on, and it's a little challenging. You have some places have a medical cannabis market, And then some places have an adult use or full legalization market. And then some states have decriminalization, or maybe you're just, you're just going to get a fine or something like that. So I think that's actually part of the challenge, is knowing, especially, here in the DC area, there are spaces where you don't really know which jurisdiction you're in. And so it can be very confusing. Or you're traveling, or maybe you're undocumented, or maybe you're a legal resident, but you're not a US citizen. And so what does that mean for you where you go? And how clear is it for everybody? And for a lot of folks, it's not. And then, even in spaces where we do have decriminalization, like in Maryland, I know for a fact that people are still getting pulled over. They're still getting questioned. They're still getting their medical cannabis taken from them at times. They're still being told, well, you have just a little bit too much on you, even though it's within the legal limits of medical cannabis possession. And so we're going to charge you as a drug dealer, right? Which is just a whole different level. And so when we talk about those kinds of laws and policies, what are we saying counts? Where do you cross that line between personal possession and distribution? And, in this day and age, most people buy things by the eighth. And so should you be presumed to be a drug dealer because you have 6 different eighths, 6 different strains, right? I mean, back in the day, it was weed is weed is weed, right? We didn't even, I don't remember even getting into like indica, sativa. What was that? It was just like, you got weed or you don't, right?
At best, you had like hydro or chocolate tie. Like you didn't get like, you definitely didn't get the indica, the sativa, and now all the different hybrids, right? And all. You didn't have.
What's a terpene? What's a cannabinoid even, right? Like all you knew was weed and it was THC, and you either had that gas or maybe you had that kush, but right. Like that's about as deep as it got. And now, I mean, we know there are, I think, over 200 terpenes, and we know that they exist in fruits and things like that, and other things that we use like lavenders and pine needles, right, from your Christmas trees. All of those things contain terpenes because it's basically the odor. There are just limitless chemovars or marijuana strains, right? There's names for everything. And then you got hybrids. So then there's new names. And so marijuana or cannabis as we know it, it's just a whole different beast. My dad used to say, it's not that cheap shit that you get from, it's not that anymore. Right. Yeah. And so that has evolved, and yet our criminal justice system hasn't. And the criminalization and the stigmatization hasn't, and the views of our policymakers haven't. I planned about 2 years ago now, we held an policy education for our legislators in Maryland at the State House. And to my knowledge, it's the first time anyone ever did that for cannabis. So it was really amazing. I brought in a lot of local folks, a lot of Black and brown folks, to come in there to show them that cannabis consumers, cannabis patients, cannabis businesses don't need to be stigmatized, right? We look just like everybody else. I'm an attorney, and I still had people kind of cracking jokes. Oh, are you going to be bringing bongs? Or I don't even know how to use a bong, first of all. So but it's that idea of that, that's what it is, instead of looking at this for really the medicine that it is. Because whether you have a card, a medical cannabis card, or you're a medical cannabis patient, we know that this plant is medicine for a lot of folks, and a lot of folks realize that by using it in a quote unquote recreational way, and realizing that it helps them for a variety of things. And that could be something physical, that could be something emotional, spiritual, right? There are a lot of uses for that. And especially, I think when we're talking about folks who are re-entering society, and that could be from periods of incarceration, that could be from the military, right? We know that this has benefits, and yet those are the communities that we as a society, because we are responsible for our government, we elect them, and our government officials are still keeping that medicine from our most vulnerable people, who also are disproportionately Black and brown, right? Because that's who gets incarcerated, that's who goes into the service. I'm Indigenous, Native Americans serve at the highest rate of any race in the United States. And when we're one of the smallest numbers, we also are more likely to die in combat, 5 times more likely. So when we talk about coming back and the things that we need to deal with when reintegrating into society, we're not equipping our communities with what they need. And not only are we not doing that, we're then also still locking them up. So, let's talk a little bit about what that looks like, because I think that there was, recently some things in the media. Oh, it's so great. The numbers are down for cannabis arrests for possession. The numbers are down for cannabis arrests for drug sales. And they are. And so if you look at the raw numbers, what you will see, whether in the United States or in the state of Maryland, is that the numbers are down, the actual physical numbers. So in 2020, for possession arrests, there were 377,866 in 2019. And in 2020, there was only 226,748. That sounds great, right? That's like, at least 150,000 less. Drug sales went from 35,487 to 23,139. Again, also great, right? Seems like a pretty significant number to me. The challenge is that then when you break that down and you look at the percentages, right? You break that down by race and ethnicity. How many Black people is that? How many Native American people is that? How many Latinx people is that? We see the same patterns. So first, we don't even have numbers for the Latinx community because the government does not collect that data. So we have no idea how many Latinx people are being arrested for cannabis or marijuana related charges, right? Because that's the difference, right? When we're talking about medicine, we get to use the term cannabis, the scientific term. But when we're talking about crimes, now we have to call it marijuana, which comes with all these stigmas and criminalizations that date back for over the past 100 years, right? That definitely are tied to racism. So even the usage of that vocabulary is problematic. But what we see again is the numbers might be going down, but the trends are the same. The patterns are the same. And I think when we're talking about government systems, it's important, and government accountability, which is ultimately where I would encourage everybody to go with this, is that we have to look at these patterns of behavior because it is individual humans who are making these laws and policies as a collective, as our government, right? So in 2019, there were 140,655 Black people arrested for marijuana possession in the United States based on the FBI crime data. In 2020, there were only 87,584 Black people arrested for marijuana possession. Now, that sounds better because it's a smaller number, right? A little more than half. But the problem is that when you convert that to statistical percentages to see of the whole amount of people that were arrested, what percentage was Black, it's actually higher. So in 2019, that number represented 37%. But in 2020, that number represented 38.6%. Right? And we see the same thing for Indigenous Americans or Native Americans. They're termed American Indians by the government still. But my community, in 2019, we saw 5,019, which was 1.3%. And in 2020, we saw 3,408, but that's 1.5% of that overall number, which decreased, right? So we're seeing the same pattern. And you see the same pattern when it comes to marijuana arrests for sales as well. In 2019, there were 44% of the 35,000 folks that were arrested were Black. And in 2020, 45% of the 23,000 were Black, right?
Hey,
The same
Rita,
thing for Native Americans. And in my home state of Maryland, it's actually even worse. For marijuana possessions, of the 14,983 in 2019, 54.5% were Black. And in 2020, of the 1,072 arrests, which is a huge decrease, right? From almost 15,000 to 1,000. Absolutely, that's something to be applauded. Yet they still managed to disproportionately arrest Black people at 58.48%. And I believe I'd have to look at the statistic, but Maryland, I believe, is only about a third Black, right? And you find the same thing with the number for marijuana sale arrests. I actually think is just outrageous. In 2019, there was 1,902 arrests for marijuana sales in Maryland, and 70% were Black. And in 2020, there were only 120 marijuana sale arrests, and 80% were Black. So 97 of the 120 people arrested last year for selling marijuana in the state of Maryland were Black. 2 were Native American, and 1 was Asian. So of 120 people, 100 were minorities or people of color or disadvantaged communities, right? Only 20 were white in a state that is overwhelmingly white, and where white lawmakers hold the power.
Yeah, no, Rita, one of the things I think this is interesting. Thank you so much for for these amazing statistics. I mean, it's when you hear it from the numbers, it's always really, really impactful. So thank you for that. One of the questions I have for our listeners who have family members and who are are still either in the cells or going through these kind of sort of this system that now we learn, that like seeing like how it overly oppresses so many people who look like me or you. Tell me, like, one, I want to make sure people don't feel alone. What are you seeing when you go into the courtroom? When you see, folks that, I mean, as a public defender that are being charged with with crimes that still are centered around cannabis?
And I think that's the thing, from what I hear from is that a lot of people are still getting violated. Their probation is still getting violated for cannabis use. I know in Maryland, there is no law that says that you cannot continue to be a medical cannabis patient, even if you're on probation or even if you're incarcerated. In fact, the law would seem to imply that you should be able to access your medical cannabis, yet there's no system in place, right? And so I think that, your ability to use the medicine that works for you, I've tried these various things and they just don't work. And so I have a combination of medications that I use, and cannabis happens to be one of them. And if there was some reason where I became incarcerated, then why should I lose my ability to be healthy simply because of that? I would argue I needed even more to be healthy to, quite frankly, survive in that environment. Right. And I think
Yeah,
that's part of the
that's
problem.
the instant part of the conversation.
It's
Yeah.
this disconnect that we have with our communities, right? I don't want to say for certain, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of our policymakers at any level of government, in any jurisdiction, don't have a real understanding of what it means to be incarcerated. And I only have it from an attorney perspective, right? I know what my clients were going through. I would go sit in those jails and wait because sometimes that's all you can do. I've been locked in cells a couple times on accident. So, but that is not the same as me being forcefully placed in there and knowing that I cannot leave. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and then when you go in with a variety of health issues, because they're just, folks are just human. It doesn't change. You don't not have health issues because now you become incarcerated. So I think that, when we're talking about actionable items, which is one of my favorite things to talk about, like, what do we do? Okay, we're talking about these things, but now what do we do?
That
Right.
was going to
And
be my
so,
next question, Rita.
yeah.
My next question is, if I'm sitting at home and I'm in my living room right now, and I may not even consume cannabis, but I do understand that I shouldn't be on the side of trying to restrict people from consuming this plant. What do I do?
And that even if you have your hesitancies about the consumption, we all know you shouldn't be in chains and shackles and cages for it, right? I think everyone can agree that that is not a good use of energies, efforts, tax dollars, human lives. So I think that one of the most important things to do is advocate. And you don't have to be an attorney to advocate. You don't have to have legal training. You don't have to have any training. Advocacy is simply using your voice. And I have 2 young children. I teach them that all the time. If there's something that's going on, you got to use your voice. You got to be brave. Find other people who want to use their voice like you do. And so I think that we can do that. And I think that's something that I would even encourage our folks in our communities who are incarcerated to do. This is something you can do, right? You can use your voice. You can write your legislators.
That's a
You
great
can
question.
say,
If you're incarcerated, how do you leverage your voice? How do you use your voice to advocate for these laws that are centered around cannabis?
they have to read your emails. And so you can go online. You can say, who is my legislator? And you usually put your zip code in and find out who are your legislators. Let them know these issues are important to you. My cellie is locked up for 10 years for a joint's worth of weed. And yet I see that these billions of dollars in sales are happening here. Why is that? Why is it that people in Maryland are getting violated for cannabis consumption on probation when millions of dollars in cannabis sales are happening every year, right? There was 432 million in 2020. And we're still locking up 97 Black people for cannabis sales. And I can tell you that there are not that many cannabis licenses awarded to Black people in the state of Maryland. So, when we have these conversations, you can see how important it becomes when we start talking about legal and adult use markets, who's getting to be the business holders. And even when we craft this legislation, we see things like social equity programs and programs for disadvantaged communities. are they even really going to the communities that we're talking about? Are they going to the
Yeah.
guy that was locked up? Does he have a chance?
Yeah.
You know, what are we calling violent offenses? I mean, you know, you and I probably know full well that a lot of things that are labeled as violent are not actually what that is, right? So when we start talking about, oh, well, only we'll let non-violent offender, well, do you even know what that means in practicality? Do you know how easy it is to go from one to the other? That could be that someone else got a good plea offer and took the violent tag off and someone else didn't. And who's getting those offers, right? What kind of lawyer did you have?
Yeah.
What does your skin tone look like? What does your name sound like? Do you have an accent? Was the judge mad that day?
Yeah.
Right?
All of those. All of
All of
those.
those things. And so people don't understand the nuances of the system. And so when we start writing and crafting this social equity legislation, I think it's so important that we have folks who are from our communities that were incarcerated, that were reentering society, that they have a seat at the table. And I really think that it's important to people like me and people far more important than I am. We can't sit here and wait for y'all to find us. We need to go find you. And we need to say, you need to have a voice in this. You need to have a space to create this, because there's also, you know, we talk about cannabis licenses and businesses, but there's a lot of other opportunities for business outside of actually touching the plant.
This is what I was getting ready to ask you next, Rita, because my question now was like, are there other ways that people can participate in this explosion of the cannabis market, but may be able to do it without even having to touch the plant that could potentially restrict them from, you know, some legalities? They're like, look, I got a felony. I can't really touch the plant. But maybe there's the people who handle the lights, or maybe there's the people who, you know, handle the seating. I don't know.
No, exactly. And I think those are all prime opportunities. And what's also really important is that those are things that run like quote unquote normal businesses, right? You're not going to get hit with these tax issues, right? The challenge for a lot of our cannabis businesses to stay in business, especially our small businesses and our businesses of color, is that the operating costs are so high, right? They can't deduct a lot of things for taxes. And so it's not always as lucrative as it looks, especially if you're not operating with one of these big companies or these multi-state operators. And so, you know, we want to create spaces for our communities to be part of that. And there are a lot of things that go into that. Can you form a cleaning company? Right? Every place needs to be cleaned. Right? We have COVID going on now. Maybe you're a mask company. Do you make uniforms? Maybe they want their staff to all dress in a particular way. Right? Do you design things? You can be a brand designer. You can be a consultant. You know, I used to work for a foster care agency quite some time ago, right after college. And one of the things they would always say is, you know, your kid, it was for youth, and, you know, your teenager who ran the gang or was the drug dealer, you know, they could have been a CEO if someone would have helped them go through college and get that business degree, right? That's the difference here. They know how to run a business. So, you know, I would really encourage, again, folks that are incarcerated and those that are out to try to help make these connections, because quite frankly, they might have a level of knowledge that you're not going to get in some of these MSOs who just thought like, oh, well, cannabis looks cool. Let me go do that. I know how to do business. But you don't know cannabis. You don't know weed. And you don't know what it takes to navigate in these spaces, right? Because, you know, it's not just about being able to sell the business, right? These are brands. This is a culture. This is a whole culture that existed far, far before a lot of these companies.
Yeah.
And there's a level too, I think, of cultural competency that is really lacking in this industry, right? You have a lot of folks coming in, they're setting up their businesses, they're acting like cannabis has never been here before they got here. No, there's a whole existing legacy market here that you're over here trying to disrupt, and being, quite frankly, a little bit disrespectful to. And
Talk about it.
You know, I think that's a huge conversation. We could have a whole conference about that. But, you know, one of the things that these companies can do is they can hire folks like us to help them to provide that cultural competency, right? You don't just roll into this neighborhood and set up your weed shop. There's already a setup going on here. You can, but don't be mad when there's conflicts. You know, one of the questions I get all the time is, well, why is there still a legacy market? Because we have these, you know, adult use markets and medical markets. Do you see it? Right? People don't have to worry about pesticides with their plug, right? They don't have to worry about $75 eighths with their plug. They don't have to, you know, there's a lot of things that are going on. And I think that, quite frankly, the quote unquote legal market could really stand to learn a lot from the legacy.
This is interesting.
Right?
I love this conversation. This is like one of the things I'm enjoying about this, I mean, and I'm grateful for you coming on. Thank you so much for coming on to an episode of Marcus Asks. I could talk to you all day about this kind of stuff. I mean, it seems like you're very knowledgeable, and it's different from me talking to one of my boys just right after they rolled up, and it's like we're just all just having a conversation about how we're all emotionally attached to trying to figure out how to eradicate some of these crazy laws that have put us inside these rooms, right? But this has been very informative. One of the things that you guys have heard from Rita tonight are the stats around, from all the way from arrest to drug sales and how that impacted the community, which I think was incredible because you always see the impact when you hear the numbers. One of the things I've also heard was like Rita talk about the boundaries that are being set forth inside of this space that now we call it industry now, right? And how billions of dollars are being made here, but by so many lines that are being drawn out for people that look like her or I, especially folks or even folks that have a F on their chest. Well, my F stands for Flick Shop now, but most people have F on their chest that look like her, and I mean that come from backgrounds I come from that F stands for felony. Like, you boxed out. But I think that one of the things that Rita ended on was like showing ways that we all could still participate inside this space and not only build real relationships with folks who are doing this and have growing businesses inside of this industry, but also think outside of the box in ways that we can grow our own businesses. Rita, I'm super grateful for you. I'll leave you with the last word for the evening. What do you tell our community when they think about the marijuana laws from then and what to expect to come in the future, and how they should anticipate being able to participate in how we want to overcome some of the crazy ones that keep a lot of us right now in bondage?
Use your voice. Use your voice and hold your government accountable. Don't let them get away with painting these numbers as if everything is fine now. It's not. We see the same patterns. They're still targeting the same people, Black and brown people. So I think we all have to work together as a collective to let them know that we're not going to stand for that anymore, right? No one should be sitting in a cage watching white people make millions and billions of dollars on an industry that our aunts and uncles and cousins and everybody got locked up for. Absolutely not.
Thank you so much, Rita. I love that one of the things you said when you she gave a shout out to all my fellas and my ladies that are sitting in these rooms right now that's still on the inside. You too can use your voice.
You
I
can,
hope you family
absolutely.
members of the loved ones share that with them. Thank you for that one, Rita. That was a jewel. Appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you guys on the next episode of Marcus Asks. Rita, thank you so much. We loved having you here. If you guys haven't already, make sure you go down low Flick Shop and go send some postcards to your loved one today. See you guys soon.